What's good, y'all? You heard the news. Scottie Barnes is expected to be out for up to 3 weeks. What does this mean for you? A lot of people complain about long lives, so let me put a lot of meat of it in the front and pause. And what I'm going to do is we're going to do a mailbag question. The mailbag is 12 questions, including one from one of my favorite players of all time. So that's going to be really fun. So first, let's get to the news. And it broke last night. Wrote a post about it, article on X today. Scottie Barnes' right orbital fracture will be reevaluated in 3 weeks after a blow to the face from MVP Nikola Jokic sidelined him in Monday's overtime loss to the Denver Nuggets. Now, this basically is going to devastate a lot of people. But if you've come for a balanced, how should I feel? Can I feel better about this? How bad is it? Perspective, you've come to the right place. 3 weeks is generally prescribed time away from strenuous let me try that again. 3 weeks is the generally prescribed time away from strenuous physical activity with a right orbital fracture. And assuming there's no vision impairment or further complications, Scottie should be able to avoid surgery and any lingering concerns moving forward. And that is a phew, because orbital fractures can get bad. There's good news and bad news depending on how you look at this. Scottie will likely miss a month due to this, which almost absolutely seals the Raptors' hope of being competitive during a brutal schedule. That's not the end of the world. We knew this was going to be tough with or without Scottie. Okay. So this could very easily cue some early selling off of veterans like Bruce Brown and Jakob Pertl, as teams willing to move off of future assets will happily take on useful role players early in the season for deadweight salary. And of course, the Raptors will be compensated potentially with some picks, which would bolster their already decent 7 picks in the next 3 drafts. So here are some negatives, which I think a lot of you have already gleaned. Almost certainly cost Scottie his Supermax extension because there's a 65 game cutoff, and I don't think anyone is electing him to All NBA if he's on a 25 win team. It costs the Raptors key evaluation reps, as they've yet to see even 250 healthy minutes of Scottie, IQ, and RJ on the court together. And that is a really big concern going right back to last year. Scottie will have to once again ramp up and get into the rhythm in December as the schedule softens. And again, rhythm is a very important thing for basketball players. Scottie's shooting 18% from 3 right now. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he lost a little bit of rhythm in training camp, and he was just getting going. So you have no idea what the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks of Scottie might have looked like, but it might have looked like an MVP. And it blows a lot of your playoff chances, if not all of your playoff chances, and probably more Boucher and Fernando minutes if that's if that's your jam. All right, but here are some positives. And as you can see, the positives far outweigh the negatives because I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. It almost guarantees a lottery pick in a loaded 2025 draft, which I think the conversation in the chat is already alluding to Cooper Flag and all that stuff. More Mobo, Battle, Ochai minutes, and all 3 have been really good in their own way. They're all wings, they're all big wings, and they're all going to take a lot of minutes that previously would have gone to Scottie Barnes. It opens a roster spot for Jacoby Walter in a week if they want to use it. I think this is important because I have a lot of belief in Jacoby, and I think he needs some reps, so he'll hopefully get them. The higher draft pick is not only a player, but an asset the Raptors could use to get better. Again, people don't want to talk about trading a 5th overall or 6th overall pick, but depending on what comes back, you never know. You get to the table a lot when you have a high draft pick. This is something Bobby Webster alluded to when the Raptors had Scottie Barnes drafted at number 4, is like, you can't believe the offers that come your way when you have a draft pick that high. If the Raptors do end up with a top 5 pick, it will not only initiate discussions for that top five pick, it may also cue discussions for Kelly Olynyk or someone of that sort. It clears up the direction a bit in terms of which way this organization is going because a 3-15 start is going to be a matter of math, not emotions. And this conversation that we're going to have today is going to be highly logical, and it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be dealing too much into emotions. It might make it easier to ask Scotty to rest later in the season if the team goes into a full tank mode, as all NBA eligibility will be off the table, and he would have to know that. Scotty's reasonable. I think Scotty's logical. He would know that if the Raptors are mathematically eliminated, that maybe it would be wise and in his benefit to maybe sit out, rest. I don't know. Scottie Barnes, personal time off, 1 week, go spend time with your kid. It could be a bit of a blessing for Scottie as well, who just had a new baby. Spend some time with the kid. It's really rough to have a kid, want to be with the kid, but you're on the road all the time. This will allow Scottie some very, very useful time to rehab, to recover. It's not completely dead weight because he will be able to resume shooting and stuff like that in about a week. So maybe he'll have some time to do some skill work as well. It's not completely dead weight, but I know it feels like it right now. The Raptors cap sheet will likely look better without the near $50 million hike on Scotty's contract, which might actually be useful when team building around him. Again, not something you're going to see right away, but maybe in a couple of years, you'll be like, it would have been a lot worse had he gotten that super max for our cap sheet and team building. Boucher, Brown, Mitchell become a lot more justifiable to trade. Rookie minutes become a lot more justifiable to stomach when you're 15 games below 500, and this is just 100% true. You really can't sell playing Ulrich Shumshay any rotation minutes right now because you would immediately lose those minutes, but it would be useful for him to get at least a few. And it's the same thing with privacy on RJ and Grady and, letting them initiate pick and roll. Like you're going to lose minutes when you do that kind of stuff, but it'll be a little bit more justifiable when things are going poorly and you have a great development staff. The Raptors will have real talent worth reps and development. This won't be a Malik Williams show this year. So this will be a hard working team that can easily play competitive basketball, exciting basketball, and lose in the final stanza 30 separate times this year. And we've already seen it with the Denver Nuggets. Who's up for 30 more games like that? I mean, sure, that's great. You get a much clearer look at who RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley can be as lead dogs, especially for future reference, if that's who you choose to use to anchor bench units. And you know what? More shots for Grady. Lost in a 1-3 season is just how much better Grady has been, and his shot diet will be much harder without Scotty, but maybe that's forced growth. Okay, so we're not going to go jump right into the mailbag. And by the way, if you have mailbag questions and you did not get your mailbag question in when we were farming for questions on IG, make sure to let's make me a little bit bigger and the mailbag thing a little bit stronger. So I understand the concerns, right? A lot of you are pretty much like, see you next year, right? And this season was never going to be just about Scotty. It just wasn't. Like, there's a lot of good things happening for this team right now. And while we have seen teams like Washington and Detroit and the Charlottes be bad year after year and have nothing really to build on or to show for it, I think the Raptors are one of those teams that can really develop regardless of whether Scotty's on the court or not. It just so happens that him being on the court as a table setter makes development a hell of a lot easier. But maybe with him off the court, development becoming harder might be a good thing to weed out. Maybe there's elements of players' games that you haven't seen. Scotty sucks up a lot of possessions. He's not necessarily ball dominant, but he is a 27 to 28% usage guy. With him off the court, you're going to see more usage for guys like RJ Barrett. And maybe you really unlock a 25 point per game scorer. The point here is Scotty was never getting traded this year. At no point will the Raptors entertain this year or next year or the year after trading Scottie Barnes. They are so high on him. And I can guarantee you that nothing that he was going to do this year was going to cue, let's have discussions for Scotty. But there are a lot of players on this team that are tradable. Now, we saw Dennis Schroeder put up a really huge game last night against the Denver Nuggets. Suddenly, the NBA world is chattering about whether Dennis Schroeder could help a struggling Denver Nuggets bench, something of that sort. And you start to find that as teams get desperate, especially teams like Denver, teams like Sacramento, those teams, where maybe they're not off to the right start. and they're looking around week 4, week 5 to really save their season, and they see something on your roster that maybe not being utilized properly, but now because it's starting or getting 20 minutes a night, it's looking a lot more prominent. The wins and losses don't matter a hell of a lot. If Bruce Brown scores 20 points a game for a week, that's going to help. If Chris Boucher starts coming out and, doing crazy hustle big things, because in spite of what I may think or what you may think, Chris Boucher is probably going to get more minutes with Scottie Barnes out. Given that Scottie was starting at the 4, I wouldn't be too surprised if Chris actually gets a start. Chris is a expiring contract that you're looking to trade if you're the Toronto Raptors. This is an open secret in the NBA world. The Raptors have been looking to trade Chris Boucher since last year. And so, maybe this might be, a 20-10 run for Chris Boucher. I mean, the numbers are irrelevant to me, but it might be relevant and might catch the other GM's eyes. At this point, Chris is a pretty known commodity. But what about the unknown commodities on this team? The less known commodities, like a Jameson battle. I think you get a much cleaner look at Jameson. And I think, with his defensive upside and Jonathan Mobo's defensive upside and Jacoby's defensive upside, you might actually be able to hold water, because I got news for you. Scottie hasn't been great to start this year. He had one great game, which is the Denver game, and you were in it. You were going to win that game. However, the other 3 games, he has been poor. By his standards, he's been poor. By all NBA standards, he's been poor. So it's not like you're in these games just because Scottie's so great. In fact, in the first game, you could argue he might have helped the team more by being on the bench. Like, he didn't help them at all. And like, he was one of their 3 worst players. In the second game, he helped you a bit. In the third game, he helped you a bit. But again, you're not losing all NBA impact right now. You're losing potential all NBA impact. You're losing a potential all-star impact. But so far to date, the Raptors are not in these games or out of these games because of Scottie Barnes exclusively. They were in that game against Denver almost 100% because of Scottie. But other than that, it's been just team, right? And defensively, I think right now with where Mobo is, just from a motor perspective, we don't know what he's going to do in larger minutes and larger sample size, but I think you hold water with that trade-off. So, RJ Barrett, more minutes. You've pretty much played the entire season without RJ Barrett. Now you get RJ minutes. It's possible. The Raptors could be 5-15, 6-6 no, 5-15 is crazy. 5-10 after 15 games. It would not be impossible to think about it. So just to put the schedule up, just so everybody has a clear look at this. And I realized that I've probably picked like the smallest font in the history of the world. So unless you have a big screen, you're not going to see this, but I can see it. And the next game is against Charlotte. Then you have November 1st. So basically, if Scottie Barnes is targeting a return against, let's say, Sunday, well, it's my birthday. Nice. So let's say Scottie Barnes is targeting a Monday, November 25th at Detroit. So that would be right before my birthday, which is pretty cool. So Scottie coming back from birthday would be, you go Charlotte, your Lakers, you host the Lakers, you host the Kings, then you're on the road against the Denver Nuggets, Sacramento Kings, LA Clippers, LA Lakers. Then you face Milwaukee on the road. Then you got Detroit, Boston, Indiana, Minnesota, at Cleveland, at Detroit, at New Orleans, at Miami to close out November. So if he can get back around game 18, maybe, again, unlikely, but maybe you're holding water. I don't know. Is it possible? So I don't think it would be the end of the world. And if the Raptors are 8-10, 7-11, 6-12, I think the season is still very savable, because this was the hard part of your schedule, and it was always supposed to be bad, and you were always supposed to you were never supposed to come out of the first 25 games like over 500. That would have been freaking miracle. So what the Raptors need to do right now is work really hard if they're choosing to, stay competitive and prey on a Scottie return and, still push for the playoffs. All hope is not lost on that. However, it would be worth, looking at it that with every single loss, like if you lose tonight to Charlotte, if you lose that game to Detroit, like I'll tell you right now, hold on, just hold this off for one sec. So the games that are like the wins, like you would schedule those as wins. You probably got to get the one against Detroit November 15th. You probably got to get one on the road, right? You can't go 0-5. Denver, Sacramento, Clippers, Lakers, Milwaukee. Right now, with the way the Clippers are playing, you're not going to beat them. The way the Lakers are playing, you're not going to beat them. The way Milwaukee's playing, you might beat them. The way Sacramento and Denver are playing, honestly, you might get one. So chances are, if you don't get tonight against Charlotte, by November 12th, you could have 3 wins. It gets really, really, mm, it gets disgusting really fast, right? And again, with every loss that you like, when the odds makers made the odds for the Raptors to be 28.5 or under, over under on 28.5, they factored in the Raptors probably doing the following. They probably factored in that you would win 80% of the games that you're supposed to win, and you would win about 20 to 25% of the games that you're supposed to lose. That's generally how it's done. So right now, the Raptors have to pretty much, like, the equation has completely changed without Scotty, because now, if the odds makers had to do your odds without Scotty Barnes, if let's say Scotty Barnes was ruled out for the year at the beginning of the season, that over under of 28.5 would have gone to like 16.5. He's worth about 12 wins. So you have to now factor in that you are the underdog going into Charlotte tonight. The odds say that you're the underdog tonight. You're the road team and you're undermanned, and they have LaMelo Ball. So when you look at it that way, you know, at some point, if you become the Detroit Pistons of the world, and I know that scares a lot of people, you also become the team that other teams don't want to lose against, right? You don't like you're not going to catch anyone surprise. There's an element of surprise when you're a middle of the pack bad team, that you can catch some teams napping. But when you are literally like the Detroit Pistons, now you have like the Brooklyn Nets. Like, we don't want to lose to that team. Our fans will riot if we lose to that team. So it gets pretty bad really quickly. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I don't think it's going to be so bad for the Raptors. I think this could be a blessing in disguise for Scotty, honestly, because, again, having a new kid, as I mentioned, having to spend some time with that, being able to spend some time with his family, this will be good for him. You know, Later on, I mean, he probably hates it right now. He's probably punching air right now because this sucks, and he's probably gonna really hate watching his team lose and go out to battle without him. But again, Scotty learned a lot about his teammates last year watching from the sidelines. He grew a lot as a leader. Hopefully, he can do the same thing with a mask this time. All right. I also hope that when he comes back from the orbital fracture, that he's not wearing a mask. Not that I don't want him to protect his face, but man, like, that can that can be really like a massive adjustment for people. Okay. So here's the questions. Let's get into the mailbag at the 18-minute mark. So question one is, you seem to really love role players, Doughton, Shed, Mobo, Koloko. Why do you highlight them? Well, part of my reason for highlighting them, oh, we have a super chat here. If you have super chats or whatever, I will answer them as priority. So the homie nicked, agree, the Raptors haven't been getting a lot from Scotty in terms of production so far. He has been creating space for others based on how defenses are forced to cover him, has helped teammates. That's not so much a question, but thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Yes, that's exactly it. He table sets and he organizes your offense a lot better. You don't really have a point guard without Emmanuel quickly, and I hate to say it, Jamal Shed is the only point guard, like the true point guard on your team. Also, a lot of people are really, really mad at me in the Davion Mitchell, saga, and the article I wrote. Maybe I need to be more careful with how I word things like NBA future in jeopardy or whatever. It's what I believe. Absolutely, it's what I believe, and it's the same thing I said with Malachi Flynn last year, and a lot of people blasted me for that. I'm just trying to be realistic, but I understand that sometimes I need to be a little bit kinder with the realism. So, noted, Mr. Davion Mitchell. I will be kinder next time. Okay, you seem to really, as I mentioned, the question. You seem to really love role players like Doughton, Shad, Mobo, Koloko. Why do you highlight them? Well, part of the reason for highlighting them is because I feel like a lot of people in the media don't. Also, part of the reason for highlighting them is because a lot of their contributions often go unnoticed. And I'm not just highlighting role players for highlighting role players. I'm not like drawn to scrubs. These aren't scrubs though. They do a lot of really great things on the basketball court. They have screen assists, they box out, they hustle, they fill lanes, they make the extra pass. So I think role players go really unnoticed, especially with sports betting where it is right now, and fantasy basketball and stuff. Unless you're averaging like 12 points or 18 points, people like 20 points, they don't really care what you're doing, and people think of you as an afterthought. So yesterday on PC, I made a big point to highlight some of the role players on this team, like Jamal Shed, like Jonathan Mobo, like Jameson Battle, because I think they're great, and they're really good. They're really good for your team, and great teams have great role players. Look at every championship team in NBA history, from the Boris Diaws to the you know to the man, there's so many like the I guess you can call Ron Harper a role player at that stage, Horace Grant, Dennis Rodman. There's so many, right? Every great championship team. You look at the Lakers, Rick Fox, Robert Horry, right? Grant, Derek Fisher, like those are the championship guys, right? You look at the Warriors, to some of you fans who've followed the game a little bit more closely now, you see guys like Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala, who won Finals MVP. Like, those are great role players, right? You hope that Jonathan Mobo and Jamal Shed, guys like that, can develop into those types of players. So that's a huge win on your roster. All right, next question. How many NBA minutes versus G League minutes do you expect to see for Mobo? I didn't completely understand this, but I'm going to assume that you mean how many minutes in the NBA would I expect from him this year with Scotty out? I would love to see him at 25. I think 25 will be just enough. And obviously, at some point, he's going to get scouted and he's going to get hunted offensively. But defensively, I think he more than holds weight. I think he pushes pace. I think he's really good for your pacing. He's not really great for your spacing right now. He's not really good for your offense, but he's great for your defense. And I think he does enough good things offensively that it's worth the reps at this point. Again, he's just 23, just turned 23 yesterday. So, question number three. Do you think Scotty should stick to small forward? I feel like many of his injuries because he's playing power forward. Hmm. Well, Scotty has had a whole bunch of fluke injuries, right? Injuries that are caused by other players. They're not injuries where he's walking and he snaps his ankle. It's usually, he plants, he goes up, and somebody undercuts him, or Joel Embiid steps on his foot in the playoffs, or Emmanuel quickly kicks his hand, or he's just a really big human being and he's very fast. So when you're fast and you're big, there's some physics to that where so I don't really think it's playing power forward or whatever, but yeah, I think part of his injuries are because he doesn't take enough jump shots. I mean, maybe I'm in the minority, but I feel like jump shooters get injured less, and penetrating guards get injured more. Do you think Scotty comes back, and what does this mean for Toronto? Well, of course, I think he comes back. He's not missing an entire season for an orbital injury, but hopefully, I've answered that question earlier in terms of what it means for Toronto. How much of JMO's success so far do you think can be attributed to his chemistry with Scotty? Well, I think it always helps when you're transitioning to a new country that you have somebody who's already been here that you trust. I think it's great when you're learning a new system and with a new coach that you have somebody who can kind of show you the ropes. I mean, Jonathan Mobo is no dummy. He's not a Scotty merchant. He's obviously his own man. And I don't really think it's necessarily that. I mean, I just think that it really helps when the franchise player is someone who can kind of guide you in terms of some of the coverages and some of the NBA adjustments. I'm sure that it's helped Jonathan Mobo even in preparing for the NBA. I think Scotty has been a great resource to lean on. That's been great for him. Okay, next question. Who do you think is going to be the guy if and when the goal is to win a championship? Scottie Barnes. Where would AJ DeBonsa go for you in the 2025 draft if he was available, if he was eligible? I'm gonna catch a lot of heat for this one. I'll say he'd go number 1. I think he would go number 1. Even as a 17-year-old, I think he'd go number 1, and if I was drafting, I'd probably pick him number 1. Now, could I be wrong? Could Cooper Flag turn into a franchise savior? I don't know, but I see him as like, a really can't-miss prospect, and the last time I felt a prospect was can't-miss was Scotty. Time before that was probably Kevin Durant. Like, I don't say can't-miss too often. Like, I've said can't-miss in terms of, like, safe. I don't often say can't miss in terms of like they're going to be a Hall of Famer, right? Now a lot can change. AJ is a young kid, but from what I've seen from AJ DeBonce over the last 2 years, I've been following him for a while now. This is just like Scotty Barnes. Like in terms of like how long I've been following him pre-draft, this is just like Scotty Barnes. So in 2026, if the Raptors are bad, you're going to have the biggest AJ DeBonce resource in the world in me. But Jack saying that's not crazy. AJ is just that good. He is that good. Why does Scotty Barnes have so many haters? It's a good question. I mean, he does have an abnormal amount of haters. I've seen Paolo haters. I have, but I've never seen like haters on this level. It's kind of nuts, actually, the kind of haters he has. Uh, I think part of it is just Reddit. I think maybe some people hone in on some of his reactions, and there's all that speculation stuff. He's never going to beat the allegations or bullshit. Then I think there's also the fact that his game is just not easy to appreciate. right? He does so many things well that if you only look for, well, like for instance, if you're someone who's drawn to rebounders, you're gonna look at him and having a 7 a rebound night, and you're like, well, that's not a rebounder. If you're someone who's only drawn to a passer, you're gonna see him have a 5 turnover night, and you'll be like, that's not the greatest passer in the world. If you're only someone who's drawn to scoring, you're gonna see him and he's not gonna score 25 every night, and you're like, well, Jalen Green, Cade, Cam Thomas, they're better or something like that. And if you're someone who's only drawn to defense, well, he's going to have some pretty embarrassing defensive possessions as well. And so you put all that together and you're like, well, what the fuck does he do well? He's not a 3-point shooter. He's not the best paint finisher. He's not the best driver. He's not the best ball handler. He's not the best passer. But then you realize at some point you look up and you're like, damn, but he's pretty good at all those things, isn't he? He's pretty damn switchable. He's a pretty good defender. He's a pretty good shooter. He's a pretty good scorer. He's a pretty good rebounder. He's pretty good at everything. And typically, I think a lot of people think that that's a third option, but he's also really young. And I think that his gifts for the game mentally like will translate to a superstar, like a prime scorer. But people don't see that. And I guess they get really frustrated when they hear that the Raptors passed on Kevin Durant for him, or, the Raptors picked him over, God knows who in the draft, or, immediately when you're a top 4 pick, they say that heavy is the crown, right? So yeah. To I don't know which quote do you wanna use? To whom much is given, much is owed, much is deserved. I don't know. Like, it's one of those things, right? Where you're anointing him the face of your franchise, and, I'm pretty sure some people have an opinion that he's not that much better than Nick Claxton. So, people don't watch the Raptors. I'm gonna be honest, like, people don't watch the Raptors, and I think a lot of people make their judgments on who's a good player or a bad player based on fantasy sports and sports betting, and yeah. Okay. You can only pick one Koloko, Mobo, Eve Misi to add to your team. Holy shit. Well, pre-draft, I would have said easy, easy, easy Eve Misi. Like 100%, I would have said Eve Misi. Now, Eve has come out and he has been probably the best rookie in the league so far. It's a really young season. That being said, am I going to be a homer by picking the guy who's on the Raptors right now? I think what Jonathan Mobo has already done is so freaking impressive, but I have to factor in that Yves Missi is doing even more for the Pelicans, and he's younger. So it's really close between them, but I would pick Missi, and I would put Koloko third, not because I don't love Christian Koloko, not because I don't think he's a great player, but he is older than both of them, and I think that just skews the balance just a little bit. That being said, they're all great defenders. They're all great defenders. It would be very hard for me to imagine that Yves Missi will be a better defender this year than Koloko was as a rookie, but 3 years have passed since that moment. So, again, Yves Missi came out younger. I don't know, man. So, if I had to rank it, it'd be Mobo, then Missi, then Koloko. But Koloko is really good, and I think the Lakers got a gem in him, and I'm gonna stick to that. Please define ethical versus unethical tanking. That's interesting. And that's relative. That's part of the reason for this question was part of the reason for the title of this video. So thank you for asking this question. So I think ethical tanking is you you design a strategy that can win but is unlikely to win, and on so that's ethical tanking. Unethical tanking would be if you deliberately tank games. Like in the end, you pull your starters in the second quarter or something like that, or you deliberately mismanage your rotations towards the end of the game, or you deliberately design, 3-point shooting for non 3-point shooters or something like that. Like you got like Bruno Fernando handling the ball, coming up the court or something like I don't know. Like there's a lot of egregious things that people have done for in terms of unethical tanking, and that's very frustrating for fans. Like you just have guys that are mailing it in. I think ethical tanking is like, okay, we're gonna run, 20 pick and rolls with Davion Mitchell, and we know that he can't do it. Like, but we're gonna do it anyway. I think that's ethical because the hope is that he can get better at it. We're gonna run, I don't know. We're going to run isolation for Grady Dick, even though we know he can't really beat his man without a head of steam and an advantage. And we're just going to force him into 7 turnovers, and we know it's going to hurt us. We're gonna force RJ Barrett to guard the other team's best player, even though he's technically our worst defender in the starting lineup per the data last year. I mean, all of these things would be defined as ethical, but it's a fine line. It's a really fine line because you could say putting your worst defender on the best player is unethical. However, if your goal and you believe it. Sometimes it's if you believe that this is possible, is to force development of your worst defender to become better. And the only way they're going to do that is by taking on more responsibility and basically being called out every single day in practice and in film sessions. Then maybe that's what I'd consider ethical. Okay, one more question. No, two more questions. What's the best version of Grady Dick? I see a fifth option on a decent team, sixth man on a contender. Well, I grew up a really big fan of shooters, specifically Allen Houston was one of my favorite players. Glenn Rice, one of my favorite players growing up. I had a Glenn Rice jersey. Later on, I got a Glenn Rice jersey. I didn't get a Glenn Rice jersey in his prime, but I got a Glenn Rice jersey in like 2001. So I mean, if you were there, you knew what a big deal Glenn Rice was, right? I think more modern examples, contemporary examples of people would gravitate towards would be like guys like Klay Thompson. Now, Klay Thompson is not a third option on a championship team. He became one, but he wasn't. He could be a second option. It depends on how great your first option is, though. So I think that matters. So Grady Dick right now in Denver would be a godsend off the bench for them. But I also think Grady Dick could probably replace some of what Jamal Murray does. Not as well, sure. Jamal's a better player right now, but could Grady be a better player than Jamal Murray in a couple of years, 3 years? Yeah. And Jamal was like the second option on a championship team. You may think that's crazy. You might because Jamal was, a really, really high draft pick, but Grady was also a high draft pick. Grady fell for reasons unknown to me, but most people had him top 10 in most mock drafts, right? The latest he was going is 11th. So he slipped to the Raptors at 13th. So don't devalue a player because they went to 13th. Devin Booker went to 13th. Kobe Bryant went to 13th. Donovan Mitchell went to 13th. Last I checked, the two best shooting guards in the league right now were 13th overall picks. And Grady's a shooting guard. So he's a big guard. His activity level is insane. His defense is okay. His shooting is very good. His finishing packages this year have been astounding. And I think his athleticism is very underrated. And I think part of it is because he's white. I think a lot of people just kind of underrate his athleticism because he's white. But I want you to imagine, and I know this is going to sound really stupid, but I want you to imagine if he was black, right? You might feel really differently about his chances of being a star, but because he's always drawn comparisons to guys like Corey Kispert, et cetera, you kind of just assume role player, right? Well, Gordon Hayward, wasn't really hyped, but he became a really good player, right? Grady's a good rebounder. Grady can be a competent defender, a team defender. If he's your fifth best defender, you can have a really, really good defense. If he's your third best defender, you're fucked. I'll say that clearly. But he can be decent. And the movement shooting opens up so many pockets for everybody else. I would see him as a third man on a contender and maybe a second option on a decent team. And that would be my outlook in terms of upside for him. Okay, final question, I think. What was your favorite game I played, college or pro? NBA Finals, Game 3, 1999. My favorite game. I watched it on TV, rooted for you really hard, and yeah, that was my favorite game. All right. Nice one saying Dick the best shooter on the team. I think Emmanuel Quickly is the best shooter on the team right now, but Grady will get there. Andrew saying I screamed in my house when Grady got that block off the backboard. Facts. Anyways, I'll have y'all covered tonight after the Charlotte loss, win, whatever. We're gonna speak about it. If the Raptors win tonight, great. Now you're 2-3. You're one step closer. If you lose tonight, well, suddenly the tanking talk is going to get louder. And the more of these games you lose, if you start 1-8, 2-8, 2-9, the math will pretty much write itself. And at some point, you're going to have to pull the plug. And at that point, you really hope that, you know, two things have to be true, right? Number one, Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster are on a really good streak right now. So hopefully you extract pretty decent assets for whatever you're dangling. Number two, Darko Rajakovic and Jamal Malela are on a generational run of development. So hopefully they will have a lot to develop this year. So that's going to be cool. All right. I'm going to talk to y'all later. Please hit like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And the 250 of you in here, thank you very much. And to the homie Nick for, your generous support through super chats throughout. Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much.